There are houses that hold grief the way stone holds cold, long after the fire has gone out, long after anyone remembers what warmed the room. The storm had been building since noon. By the time the last delivery cart rattled away from the servants' entrance of Ashbourne Park, the sky above the Cheshire Hills had turned the color of a bruise left too long untended, purple-gray and swollen, pressing low against the tree line. The wind came first in suggestions, a rattle of the casement above the housekeeper's pantry, a gust that sent a loose page of figures skidding across the deal table, and then in earnest, heaving against the old stone like something that wanted in. Rhea did not look up from the ledger. She had learned not to flinch at weather. She had been at Ashbourne Park for 11 months and 4 days. She knew the count precisely because she had arrived on the 20th of October in the year following her father's death, carrying a canvas satchel, a set of references she had written herself, and the composed expression of a woman who had already spent her grief in private and had none left to spend in public. She was 25. She had, before her father's ruin and subsequent death from a fever that poverty had made fatal, been Miss Rhea Voss of the Wiltshire Vosses, a family with a decent house, a decent library, and an indecent talent for ignoring the state of their finances until it was too late. She was now, in the eyes of Ashbourne Park, simply the housekeeper's assistant, which meant she was the woman who kept the actual accounts while Mrs. Pendleton, the true housekeeper, managed the appearance of keeping them. The arrangement had suited Mrs. Pendleton perfectly. She received the credit. Rhea received £1 and 4 shillings per month. Rhea pressed the end of her pen against the column of figures and drew a line beneath the sum, £47 and 6 shillings. That was what Lord Fenwick Ashbourne, the current occupant of the estate and the Duke's first cousin, owed to the butcher, the chandler, and the coal merchant combined. She had written it out twice, in 2 different columns, because Lord Fenwick had twice accused her of error when she had presented him with uncomfortable numbers, and she had learned to be unambiguous. She did not enjoy unambiguity with Lord Fenwick, but she practiced it without fail. From somewhere deep in the house, from the long gallery that ran above the east wing, the Wolfhound began to howl. It was always the storms. The dog, a great silver-gray Irish Wolfhound that had arrived with the house's last occupant, the Duke's late aunt, and had since been left in the care of whoever would take it, had no name that anyone used consistently. The footman called it the ghost. Mrs. Pendleton called it a nuisance. Lord Fenwick called it worse, when he remembered it existed, and had twice ordered it removed to the stables, where it howled so pitifully that sleep became impossible for the entire household, and it was eventually returned to the gallery. The dog was afraid of storms. It had, Rhea suspected, been afraid since long before Lord Fenwick arrived, and it would be afraid long after he left, because fear laid down deep enough became a kind of memory the body carried with no reference to the original cause. She understood that. She set down her pen, listened to the howl rise and sustain and finally break into a trembling whine, and she rose from the table. The gallery was dark when she arrived, the candles not yet lit, the long row of family portraits barely visible in the failing light. The Wolfhound was at the far end, pressing itself against the wainscoting beneath the window, its pale coat silver in the stormlight. It did not growl when Rhea approached. It watched her with amber eyes that were sheepish and desperate in equal measure. She sat down on the bare floor beside it, her gray wool skirt spreading around her, and placed her hand on its flank. The dog shuddered once, a full-body tremor, and then was still. She sat with it for perhaps an hour. The storm broke over the house in stages. First the full violence of the wind, then the rain, sharp and horizontal against the glass, then the thunder rolling in from the Welsh border like artillery she had never heard but could imagine. The Wolfhound pressed closer with each wave. Rhea did not move. This was the hour, if any existed, when she allowed herself to think of her father. Not of the ruin, not of the letters she had found after, the creditor's letters, the desperate borrowings he had concealed from her with a cheerful face and a fresh decanter, but of the man himself, who had read aloud to her from Defoe and Smollett on winter evenings, who had smelled of pipe tobacco and old wool, who had believed, incorrectly but sincerely, that intelligence was a finer inheritance than property. She had inherited his intelligence and none of his property. The intelligence was currently earning her £1 and 4 shillings per month. She heard nothing over the storm. She did not hear the coach arrive. The first sign was the light. It swept across the high gallery windows, torchlight or lantern light, moving in the forecourt below with the deliberate swiftness of a well-organized arrival. Then came the sound through the floor, the main door below thrown open, the concussive stamp of boots on the marble entrance hall, a voice, male, low, carrying the unhurried authority of a man who had never once in his life been required to raise it, issuing what appeared to be a single sentence that caused, judging by the immediate cascade of responding footsteps and the strangled cry she could only attribute to Mrs. Pendleton, something close to a domestic earthquake. Rhea rose. She brushed her skirt. She was careful. She reached the top of the main staircase and looked down. The entrance hall of Ashbourne Park was not a small room. It had a ceiling 20 feet above its checkered floor, 4 pilasters along its north wall, and a fireplace large enough to stand in. It could absorb a great deal of human activity without appearing crowded. It appeared crowded now. 3 men she did not recognize stood near the door, divesting themselves of riding coats that shed water onto the marble. 2 footmen and Mrs. Pendleton hovered in postures of alarmed attention. Lord Fenwick, who had evidently been pulled from his evening's entertainment, judging by the brandy glass still in his hand and the high color of his face, stood to one side with an expression Rhea could only describe as a man calculating how badly things were about to go. And at the center of all of it, having apparently moved from the doorway to the fireplace in the time it had taken the room to rearrange itself around him, stood Caspian Ashbourne, the Duke of Vane. She had never seen him before. She had heard him described in the 11 months of her employment at the estate that bore his family's name. She had heard him called formidable by the solicitor who visited twice a year. She had heard him called unforgiving by Lord Fenwick in one of his looser moments over port. She had, in the household accounts she kept, seen the weight of his name, the estate revenues paid through his office, the quarterly settlements that arrived like clockwork and enabled Ashbourne Park to continue operating, despite Lord Fenwick's best efforts to the contrary. None of that had been adequate preparation. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that his travel-dark coat did nothing to minimize, with fair skin weathered slightly at the jaw, pale gray eyes that moved across the room with the patient, comprehensive attention of a man who catalogued rather than merely observed, and a stillness that was not passivity. It was the stillness of something very large and very certain that has not yet decided to move. His hair was dark, somewhat longer than fashion precisely required, and damp at the edges from the storm. His cravat was travel-loosened. He did not appear to notice or care. He was looking at the staircase. He was looking, with an expression of total neutrality, at Rhea. She did not retreat. She descended the remaining stairs at the same even pace, reached the foot of the staircase, and met his gaze. "Your Grace," she said, "the household was not informed of your arrival." "No," said the Duke of Vane. He said nothing further for a moment. He was still looking at her. "Who are you?" "Rhea Voss. I manage the household accounts." Something shifted in those pale eyes. It was not warmth precisely. It was attention reclassifying itself, moving her from background to foreground. "The accounts," he repeated. "Yes, Your Grace." He looked, then, at Lord Fenwick. The look was brief and apparently total in its effect, because the brandy glass in Lord Fenwick's hand tilted slightly as though his grip had loosened. "We will speak in the morning," the Duke said to his cousin. It was not a reassurance. Lord Fenwick's color deepened. "Caspian, I can explain. In the morning." The room understood. Lord Fenwick understood. He retreated. Mrs. Pendleton materialized with the anxious efficiency of a woman who has abruptly recognized that her professional comfort depends on a man she has never met and is now terrified of. She began to speak about rooms, fires, supper arrangements. The Duke listened to approximately 8 seconds of this, and then looked back at Rhea. "The accounts," he said again. "Bring them to the library. All of them. Tonight." She brought them. The library at Ashbourne Park was a room she had always respected and never quite inhabited. 1,200 volumes, a fire kept going regardless of season by the instruction of the late Duchess, and a smell of beeswax and paper that was the most comforting thing about the entire estate. She carried the ledgers in 2 stacks, managing both with the practiced ease of a woman who had not had anyone to carry things for her in some time, and laid them on the library table. The Duke stood at the fire. He had removed his coat. He did not seem to require assistance, comfort, or conversation. He simply turned and looked at the ledgers, and then he looked at her. "You keep these yourself?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Not Mrs. Pendleton." "Mrs. Pendleton oversees the household. I record and reconcile the figures." He picked up the topmost ledger, the current year's household expenditure, and opened it. He turned pages with the focused silence of a man who understood what he was reading. 3 pages. 5. He stopped on the page where she had recorded the merchant debts. £47.06, he said. "Yes, Your Grace, as of this morning." He turned another page. He stopped again. "These wine purchases." He did not frame it as a question. "Lord Fenwick's account," she said. "I itemized it separately beginning in March." "Why?" She had rehearsed this answer in some form, she realized, though she had never expected to give it. Because it was the only way to distinguish the household's legitimate operating costs from expenditures that will not recur once Lord Fenwick's tenure concludes. It seemed useful to know the difference. He was quiet for a long moment. "It is useful," he said. He closed the ledger. He looked at her with that same reclassifying attention. "Did my cousin know you maintained this separation?" "No, Your Grace." "Did anyone?" "No." He set the ledger down carefully. He said, "Sit down, Miss Voss." She sat. He remained standing, one hand resting on the mantelpiece, and he asked her questions for the better part of an hour. Specific, knowledgeable questions about arrears and expenditures and creditor arrangements that told her, without equivocation, that he had understood the state of the estate's finances before he arrived and had come not to discover a problem, but to address one he already knew existed. She answered without embellishment. She did not soften numbers or arrange facts in Lord Fenwick's favor, because she saw no reason to, and because the man across the table did not appear to be someone who would thank her for doing so. At some point, the storm outside shifted registers. The fury of it passed and left a steady, drumming rain that ran down the library windows in long, unbroken threads. The fire settled. Somewhere overhead, very faintly, she could hear the wolfhound. Not howling now, the low, tuneless sound that meant it was still unsettled, but no longer in full distress. The Duke heard it too. "What is that animal doing in the house?" "It belongs to the late Lady Ashbourne, Your Grace." "It was her dog. It has nowhere else to go." He said nothing. She could not read his expression. "It is afraid of storms," she added. "It generally quiets before midnight." "Does it?" "Yes." He looked at the ceiling for a moment, not with irritation, she thought, but with some complicated calculation she was not privy to. He returned his attention to her. "Go to bed, Miss Voss. I will review the remaining ledgers myself." She rose. At the door she paused, not from sentiment, only from a practicality that seemed necessary, and said, "The 3rd volume, the gray cover, runs from January through April. The notation system changes midway. I can explain it to you in the morning, if it is unclear." He said, without looking up from the page, "It will not be unclear." She left. She lay in her narrow room above the servants' stair and did not sleep for a long time, and she did not investigate why, because some questions are better left in the dark, where they cannot be followed to their honest answers. In the morning, the estate was different. Not in any physical way a stranger would have noticed. The same checkered floor, the same damp smell from last night's rain still working through the window frames, the same routine of fires and breakfast trays proceeding in their usual order. But the staff moved differently, more quietly, more quickly, with the specific, calibrated alertness of people who have detected a new gravity in the house and are adjusting their orbits accordingly. Lord Fenwick did not come down to breakfast. At 10 o'clock, his man came to Rhea and asked, with evident discomfort, whether Miss Voss might be needed in the study. Rhea collected the relevant documents, the merchant invoices, the wine account she had maintained in parallel, a letter she had drafted 3 months ago and never sent to the Duke's solicitor because it had not been her place to send it, and which she now brought on instinct, and went to the study. Lord Fenwick was already there. He sat in the chair before the desk, the way a man sits when he has been placed rather than chosen. The Duke of Vane sat behind the desk. The desk had been empty when the Duke arrived. It now held the household ledgers, opened and arranged. It also held a second set of documents, papers she did not recognize, bearing official stamps. She understood, looking at them, that he had not slept much either. "Sit, Miss Voss," the Duke said. She sat. Lord Fenwick looked at her, with an expression that combined contempt and desperation in roughly equal measure, and said, "This is completely irregular. A housekeeper's assistant has no business. She is the household accountant," said the Duke of Vane, in the tone of someone correcting an error of arithmetic, not engaging in debate. "She has every business. Be quiet, Fenwick." Lord Fenwick was quiet. The Duke laid his hand on the wine account ledger and slid it across the desk toward his cousin. £63, he said. "That is what you have spent, in 8 months, from this estate's household fund, on personal wines and spirits. You will note, I said household fund, not your allowance. The household fund." Fenwick's jaw tightened. "An accounting error, clearly." "There are no accounting errors in these books." The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Miss Voss has maintained 2 parallel accounts, specifically to prevent this defense from being credible." Fenwick looked at Rhea. The contempt had not entirely left his expression, but something had joined it, something colder and more personally directed. "She is a servant," he said. "She had no authority to. She had the authority of accuracy." The Duke drew one of the official stamped documents toward him. "The outstanding merchant debts are now settled. I have attended to them this morning. The estate will be reimbursed from your quarterly allowance, effective this quarter and the next, until the £63 is recovered in full." He looked up. "Do you understand?" The silence lasted long enough to have weight. "You cannot," Fenwick said. "I am your family." "You are my cousin," the Duke said. "You are also in possession of a house that belongs to the dukedom, at my forbearance, and you have spent 11 months misappropriating its operating funds. I can reduce your allowance. I can end your tenure here. I can ask the solicitor to determine whether the misappropriation warrants formal examination." He paused. "I am offering you the first option. It would be prudent to accept it." Fenwick accepted it. He accepted it with the compressed fury of a man swallowing something that burned, and he left the room without another word, and as he passed Rhea's chair he did not look at her, but she felt the cold draft of his anger as he went. She was left alone with the Duke. He was looking at the document he had set down. He was not reading it anymore. He was looking at the particular point on the page that people look at when they are thinking about something other than the object in front of them. "The letter," he said. She looked at him. "The unsent letter in your folder," he said, "to my solicitor. When did you write it?" She had nearly forgotten she was still holding the folder. She set it on the desk. 3 months ago. He did not open the folder. "What stopped you from sending it?" She considered. The honest answer was the only one she had. "It was not my place. Lord Fenwick employed me. Writing to the Duke's solicitor about the Duke's cousin's behavior was outside the scope of my position." "And yet you wrote it." "I wrote it because I needed to think clearly, and because I thought that if I ever had the opportunity to give it to someone who could act on it, it would save time." She paused. "I did not anticipate the opportunity arising this quickly." He looked at her then, directly, in the way he had looked at her at the top of the stairs the previous night, with that specific quality of attention that felt like being measured not for deficiency, but for genuine dimension. "You have been here 11 months, he said. 11 months, and 5 days, at £1 and 4 shillings per month. She said nothing. The number spoke adequately for itself. "That will change," he said. He said it as though it were an entry in the ledger, a correction of an obvious error, and she understood he meant it in exactly that spirit. He stood. "I will be at Ashbourne Park for the remainder of the month. After that, I return to Vane House in Northumberland. I have a steward there who is competent, but overworked, and frankly, insufficiently precise." He looked at her steadily. "I am offering you a position as house accountant at Vane House. The salary is £4 per month." She sat with it for a moment. £4 per month was more than 3 times what she earned now. Vane House in Northumberland was the principal seat of one of the oldest dukedoms in England, and the man making the offer was standing at the opposite side of a desk looking at her with an expression that was entirely professional and contained, she was nearly certain, absolutely nothing professional about it. "I will need to consider it," she said. He blinked. Just once. She thought it was possible. No one said that to him very often. Of course, he said. 23 days remained of the month. She counted them. He stayed the full time. He worked through the estate business with a systematic thoroughness that she recognized and respected, because it was the same quality she applied to the accounts. Not hurrying, not cutting corners, doing the thing completely. He rode the boundary of the estate in the mornings regardless of weather, which at this time of year meant cold and frequently wet. He reviewed tenants' concerns in the afternoons. He read in the library in the evenings, and twice she found herself also in the library, once by necessity, to retrieve a document, and once by what she could only call an accident of preference, and on both occasions he indicated the chair nearest the fire without words, only a slight motion, and she sat, and they read in companionable silence for the better part of 2 hours. On the fourth evening, she arrived in the gallery at the first sign of the storm, to find him already there. He was sitting on the floor. He was in his shirt sleeves, his back against the wainscoting, his long legs extended. The wolfhound was pressed against his side with the total commitment of an animal that has decided, unilaterally and without recourse, that someone is its person. He had his hand on its flank. He looked up at her without surprise, as though he had expected her. Perhaps he had. "It started earlier tonight," he said. "The barometric pressure drops very quickly in this valley," she said. "It feels the change before we can hear the storm." He looked down at the dog. He said, quietly enough that she almost didn't catch it, "She was my aunt's dog from a pup. I gave her the dog myself, 7 years ago." He paused. "I should have arranged for it to come north when my aunt died. I didn't." She sat down on the floor beside him, not quite touching, near enough that the warmth of it was mutual. "You are arranging it now," she said. The storm came in full this time, a Cheshire autumn storm in the fullest sense, rain and thunder and the particular whistle of wind through old stone that made the walls seem alive and breathing. The wolfhound shuddered. Rhea put her hand on its neck. The Duke kept his hand on its flank. The animal lay between them and trembled, and slowly, over the course of an hour, quieted. "My aunt called her Constant," the Duke said, at some point in the second hour. "It suits her," Rhea said. They did not say anything further. They stayed until the storm had worked itself out and the rain settled into its afterthought pattern, and the house was fully, deeply quiet, the quiet of a place that has been afraid and is no longer. Then they rose, separately, and went to their respective rooms, and Rhea lay in her narrow bed and was honest with herself, finally, in the dark. She was in love with him. It had happened in the way she suspected most irreversible things happened, not at any single identifiable moment, but across a series of small, specific instances that collectively amounted to a condition she could not account out of existence by being practical about it. She accepted the position. The days between her acceptance and the journey north were 11. She spent them arranging the estate's accounts in a state that her eventual replacement could understand, writing transition notes in her clearest hand, and not examining her decision too closely, because she was afraid that if she examined it, she would find something there that was not purely professional, and she would have to determine what to do about it. Vane House was in Northumberland, 22 miles from the coast, set into the moor like something that had grown there rather than been built. It was considerably larger than Ashbourne Park, colder, windier. The stone was darker and the corridors longer, and the windows faced north and east in a way that let in more sky than warmth. She arrived in November, which was perhaps not the season in which a southern woman formed her most favorable impressions of Northumberland. She found she liked it immediately. The household at Vane House was larger, the staff better trained, the accounts more complex. She worked. She worked the way she had always worked, thoroughly, precisely, without complaint. But for the first time since her father's death, she worked in a house that felt ordered, purposeful, and adequately funded, which was not a small thing. The steward, a quiet Northumbrian man named Ellicott, was cooperative rather than territorial, because apparently the Duke had been unambiguous with him about the new arrangement, and Ellicott respected unambiguity. The Duke was in residence. He was also always working. They were often, therefore, in the same rooms, at different tasks, in the same silence that had established itself in the Ashbourne library and apparently traveled. He brought her things, sometimes. Not gifts in any sentimental sense. A relevant letter he thought she should see before it went in the correspondence file. A contract amendment that touched on household costs, once a book from the library that he had apparently left on her desk with no note, and which she only attributed to him because it was Defoe, and there was no one else in the house who would think she wanted Defoe. She ran her finger across the cover for a long moment before she opened it. He watched Constant. He walked the dog himself in the mornings, in weather that in Northumberland was approximately 70% hostile, and she saw them sometimes from the window of the accounts room, the Duke in his dark coat and the great silver dog ranging beside him across the moorland, both apparently entirely at ease, and the sight of it did something to the arithmetic of her feelings that she could not enter neatly in any ledger. December came. With it came the house party. She had known it was coming, had organized the household accounts for it, the additional provisions and staff arrangements. What she had not fully prepared for was Lady Montrose. Lady Montrose arrived on the 14th of December in a carriage that had barely stopped before she was speaking. She was perhaps 40, beautiful in the manner of something lacquered, and she moved through Vane House with the proprietary ease of a woman who considered her claim to the place a matter already settled. She brought with her a niece, a brother-in-law, and an opinion, evidently deeply held, that the position of house accountant was a convenient fiction for a young woman of no particular standing who had installed herself in the Duke's household under professional pretenses. She expressed this opinion to Rhea directly, on the second day, in the corridor outside the dining room, in a sentence that was so elaborately structured and precisely aimed that Rhea genuinely appreciated the craftsmanship of it, even as it landed. "I find it so refreshing," Lady Montrose said, in the tone of a woman who finds nothing refreshing at all, that Caspian has taken to engaging his housekeeper in these little executive fictions. It gives the staff such a useful sense of importance. One does wonder what accounts require managing in a house this well endowed, but I suppose there is always something for an industrious creature to occupy herself with. Rhea looked at her. She did not flush. She did not beg. She said, in her flattest and most precise voice, "The house accounts in the current quarter total £4,042 across 12 ledger categories. 12% of that represents an irregularity in the Harrogate supply contract that I have been engaged to correct this week. If you have a question about the specifics, I am happy to answer it." Lady Montrose's smile thinned but did not retreat. "How thorough," she said. Rhea went back to the accounts room. She found the Duke there. He was standing at the window. She did not know how long he had been standing there. She set down her documents and did not speak. "Montrose," he said, without turning. "Yes," she said. She was not going to discuss it further. It was not a wound, precisely. It was a scratch, the kind that stung only because she was not entirely armored on the side the blow had landed from. He turned. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, which was notable because she had become familiar with the range of his expressions, which was not large. This was not the reclassifying attention of the first night, nor the focused professional neutrality of the library. This was something plainer and more uncomfortable. It looked, she thought, very much like a man who was angry on someone's behalf and was deciding whether to say so. "She was invited," he said, "by my mother. I should not have permitted it. It is your mother's prerogative to invite guests. It is my prerogative to ensure my household is managed without contempt for the people running it." He paused. He said it differently the second time, more carefully, as though selecting the exact right stone from a riverbed. "You run it." She looked at him. He crossed the room and stood before her at the accounts table, the ledger she had just set down between them, and he said, with the blunt economy of a man who had apparently decided to stop calculating and simply speak, "I brought you north because I could not account for the competence of the household at Ashbourne without you in it. That is the professional reason." He held her gaze. "The other reason I am less practiced at stating." Her pulse was doing something that would have been embarrassing to record. She kept her voice even. "I would appreciate precision," she said. Something moved across his face. It might have been the closest thing to amusement she had ever seen on it. "You would," he said. "All right. I have thought about little else since you came down those stairs in the dark with a candle and told me the household had not been informed of my arrival, as though it were my fault." He paused. "It was my fault. I should have sent word. I did not send word, because I had not been to Ashbourne Park in 18 months, and I wanted to see it as it actually was. He looked at her directly. I saw it as it actually was. She said, I am a housekeeper's assistant from a ruined family. You were, he said. You are currently the most competent person in this house, and if you will permit me to stop conducting my own feelings as though they were a liability I am hoping to transfer, I am asking. He stopped. The word appeared to cost him something. I am asking. Outside, the December wind worked at the north windows. Constance had followed the Duke into the accounts room, apparently, because she was suddenly there at the edge of Ria's vision, the silver enormous dog placing herself between them and sitting with great finality, as though she were settling a question that had been open too long. Ria looked at the dog. She looked at the Duke. She thought about her father reading aloud in a winter room. She thought about 11 months of £1 and 4 shillings and the composure she had maintained through every one of them at a cost she had never admitted. She thought about the floor of the gallery at Ashbourne and the storm, and the first time she had understood that sitting beside someone in shared silence could be a form of declaration neither person had made yet. She said, I will not come to you as a charity case. No, he said, you will come as the only person in this house I cannot think without. She heard that. She turned it over. She checked it for the kind of sentiment a lonely woman might mistake for something it was not, and she found, in the examining, that it bore the weight. I have conditions, she said. He looked, if anything, relieved, as though conditions were familiar ground, as though he had hoped she would bring them, state them. I continue to manage the accounts, not as a courtesy, as a role. Yes. The steward reports to us jointly on estate matters that touch household operations. He considered. Yes. And you tell me, she said, when you are going to arrive at a house without notice. Because managing the chaos of an underprepared household in a storm is work I am willing to do exactly once. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, very quietly, once was enough. He took one step and she took one step, and he put his hand along her jaw with the careful deliberateness of a man who has been restraining a gesture for a long time, and she placed her hand flat against his chest and felt his heart working underneath her palm at a rate that was entirely unprofessional and perfectly matched to her own. Constance stood up and leaned against both of them with her full considerable weight, and they both staggered slightly, and the Duke made a sound that was a laugh. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. It was low and brief and entirely unguarded, and it was the best thing she had heard in longer than she could calculate. They were married at the New Year. There was no excess about it. A vestry ceremony on a gray January morning, the solicitor and Ellicott and one of the kitchen maids as witnesses, Constance sitting in the aisle with majestic patience, as though she had arranged the entire thing herself and was waiting for them to catch up. The Duke signed the register with his full name. Ria Voss signed it beside his with her clear, narrow hand and looked at what the two names made together on the page and felt, for the first time in years, the specific warmth of a thing that could not be taken from her. She had come to a great house with a canvas satchel and a borrowed composure and no expectation of anything beyond survival. What she found, in the end, was not rescue. Rescue implies a person lifted out of something and deposited somewhere better, owing a debt of gratitude they can never fully repay. What she found was a partnership with a man who needed her precision, the way the house needed its stone, not as ornament, but as structure. What he found was the part of himself that had been running on discipline and distance for so long, he had forgotten the two were not the same as being alive. And if you have ever sat with something frightened in the dark, a storm, a grief, a feeling you were not certain you were permitted, you will know that sometimes the bravest thing is simply to stay, not to fix it, not to wait it out, just to put your hand on its flank and be present until the noise passes and the whole house, finally, sleeps.